Jake Martinez wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag as he heard the commotion outside his repair shop. The sound of multiple engines and shouting voices cut through the usual hum of the space station's life support systems. He pushed himself out from under the cargo hauler he'd been fixing and walked to the grimy window that faced the main corridor of Epsilon Station. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 Vorthan enforcers, their imposing 7-foot frames encased in polished black armor, were dragging something between them. At first, Jake thought it was a piece of equipment, but then he saw the pale blue limbs and the way it moved. It wasn't something, it was someone. The being they dragged was small, barely reaching Jake's shoulder, with delicate features and skin that seemed to shimmer like moonlight on water. Her clothing was torn and stained, and even from his window, Jake could see the dark patches that looked suspiciously like blood. The Vorthans weren't being gentle. Jake had been living on Epsilon Station for 3 years, ever since he'd left Earth to find work in the outer colonies. He'd learned to keep his head down and mind his own business. The Vorthans controlled this sector of space, and humans were barely tolerated here. Most of the time, Jake was invisible to them, just another grease monkey fixing their ships and equipment. But something about the way the small being stumbled and tried to keep up with her captors made Jake's chest tighten. She looked young, maybe even a child by her species standards, and she was clearly in distress. The group passed by a shop, and Jake caught a glimpse of her face. Her eyes were large and luminous, a deep violet color that seemed to glow with their own light. Those eyes found his through the window, and in them, Jake saw something that made him forget all about keeping his head down. Terror. Pure disperate terror. The moment stretched between them as the procession continued down the corridor. Jake watched until they disappeared around a corner, heading toward the detention levels in the lower sections of the station. He stood there for several minutes, staring at the empty corridor and trying to convince himself it wasn't his problem. It didn't work. Jake had always been a fixer. When something was broken, he couldn't rest until he'd figured out how to repair it. That instinct had served him well as a mechanic, but it had also gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. His ex-wife used to say he had a hero complex, always trying to save everyone and everything around him. Maybe she was right, but Jake couldn't shake the image of those violet eyes from his mind. He returned to his work, but his concentration was shot. Every few minutes, he found himself glancing toward the window, hoping to see the Vorthans returning with their prisoner unharmed. But the corridor remained empty except for the usual foot traffic of station workers and traders. Hours passed. Jake finished the cargo hauler repair and moved on to a mining drone that needed its extraction arm recalibrated. The work usually helped clear his mind, but today it felt mechanical and pointless. He kept thinking about the small being and wondering what crime she could have possibly committed to warrant such rough treatment. As the station's artificial night cycle began, the corridors grew quieter. Most of the shops and businesses closed, leaving only the essential services and the taverns that catered to off-shift workers and visiting spacers. Jake was about to lock up his own shop when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. Scratching. It was coming from somewhere behind his shop in the maintenance tunnels that ran throughout the station's infrastructure. Jake grabbed his work light and headed to the back of his shop, where a maintenance hatch provided access to the tunnel network. The scratching came again, closer now. Jake pressed his ear to the hatch and listened. Someone, or something, was definitely moving around in there. The scratching was rhythmic, purposeful, not like the random sounds of the station's aging systems, but like someone trying to get somewhere. Jake hesitated. Opening that hatch could mean trouble. The maintenance tunnels were supposed to be off-limits to anyone except station engineers, and being caught down there could result in questions he didn't want to answer. But something about the sound nagged at him. He opened the hatch. The tunnel beyond was dark and cramped, barely tall enough for Jake to stand upright. The air was thick with the smell of recycled atmosphere and industrial lubricants. Jake aimed his light down the tunnel and called out softly, "Hello, anyone there?" The scratching stopped immediately. Jake waited, listening to the hum of the station's machinery. Just as he was about to close the hatch and return to his shop, he heard something that made his heart race. A whisper, barely audible but definitely there. Please. The word was spoken in accented standard, the universal language used for trade and communication between species. The voice was feminine and weak, full of exhaustion and pain. Jake didn't hesitate. He climbed into the tunnel and began moving toward the sound, his work light cutting through the darkness ahead of him. The tunnel curved to the left, following the outer hull of the station. As he rounded the bend, his light fell on something that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was the alien girl from earlier, huddled against the tunnel wall like a wounded animal. Up close, Jake could see that her skin wasn't just pale blue. It had an almost translucent quality, with darker veins visible beneath the surface. Her hair was long and silver, matted with what looked like dry blood. She wore the tattered remains of a simple gray jumpsuit that had probably been pristine before whatever had happened to her. But it was her condition that shocked Jake the most. She was clearly dehydrated, her skin drawn tight over delicate bones. Her breathing was shallow and labored, and when she turned to look at him, those violet eyes were dim and unfocused. Water, she whispered, the word barely escaping her cracked lips. Please, water. Jake's mind raced. This was definitely the same being the Vorthins had been dragging through the station earlier. Somehow, she had escaped and made her way into the maintenance tunnels. But she was in bad shape, possibly dying. Helping her would mean going against the Vorthins, something that could get Jake thrown off the station or worse. But looking at her now, Jake realized he didn't have a choice. He couldn't walk away from someone who was suffering, especially not someone who looked so young and vulnerable. Okay, he said softly, trying not to startle her. I can help, but we need to get you out of here first. She tried to respond, but no sound came out. Jake could see the effort it took for her just to keep her eyes open. Moving carefully, Jake approached her. She tensed as he got closer, but she was too weak to flee. Jake knelt beside her and gently placed one arm under her shoulders and another under her knees. She weighed almost nothing, like she was made of air and light. I'm going to take you somewhere safe, he told her as he lifted her. Just hang on. The journey back through the tunnel felt like it took forever. The girl's breathing became even more shallow, and Jake was afraid she might slip into unconsciousness before he could get her help. When they finally reached his shop, Jake carried her to the small break room in the back where he sometimes spent his lunch breaks. He laid her on the narrow couch and immediately went to the water dispenser in the corner. The girl's eyes followed his movements, and when she saw the water, she tried to sit up. Jake quickly filled a cup and returned to her side. Easy, he said, supporting her head as he brought the cup to her lips. Small sips. She drank desperately, and Jake had to pull the cup away to keep her from making herself sick. Water ran down her chin and onto her torn jumpsuit, but she didn't seem to care. When Jake offered the cup again, she drank more slowly, some color returning to her pale features. After the third cup, she was able to sit up on her own. She looked at Jake with those remarkable eyes, and for the first time since he'd found her, she seemed truly aware of her surroundings. Thank you, she said, her voice still weak, but clearer now. I thought I was going to die in there. What's your name? Jake asked, settling into the chair across from the couch. She hesitated for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Kira, she said finally. My name is Kira Thane. I am Jake Martinez. And you're in a lot of trouble, aren't you? Kira's expression darkened, and she looked down at her hands. More than you know. Jake studied her for a moment. She couldn't be more than 16 or 17 by human standards, though he knew alien aging could be different. What could someone so young have done to warrant being hunted by Vorthan enforcers? Want to tell me about it? He asked. Kira was quiet for so long that Jake thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm not supposed to exist. Before Jake could ask what she meant, the lights in his shop flickered. Through the break room's small window, Jake could see the shadows of figures moving past his storefront. Big figures. Vorthen-sized figures. They found me, Kira whispered, terror returning to her eyes. Jake's mind raced. If the Vorthens searched his shop and found Kira, it would mean serious trouble for both of them. But where could he hide her? The shop was small, and there weren't many places to conceal someone, even someone as slight as Kira. The sound of heavy footsteps approached the shop's front door. "Listen to me," Jake said urgently, keeping his voice low. "There's a storage compartment under the floor near my main workbench. It's where I keep expensive parts. Can you fit in there?" Kira nodded, already moving to stand despite her weakness. "Once you're hidden, don't make a sound no matter what you hear," Jake continued. "I'll handle the Vorthens." They moved quickly through the shop to the main work area. Jake pulled back a section of floor plating to reveal a compartment about the size of a coffin. It would be cramped, but Kira could fit. As she climbed into the hiding space, the front door's security chime announced visitors. Jake quickly replaced the floor panel and grabbed a random tool, trying to look like he'd been working. 3 Vorthens entered his shop. Jake recognized the lead enforcer, Commander Vex, the station's head of security. Vex was even larger than most Vorthens, with scarred armor that spoke of years of combat experience. His cold, reptilian eyes surveyed the shop with the calculating gaze of a predator. "Human," Vex said, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate through Jake's bones. "We are searching for an escaped prisoner, a young Zephyrian female. Have you seen anything suspicious?" Jake forced himself to look confused. "Zephyrian? I don't think I've ever seen one of those before. What do they look like?" Vex's eyes narrowed slightly. "Small, blue skin, silver hair. She was last seen in this section of the station." "Sorry, Commander. I've been working on this engine all day. Haven't seen anyone like that." Jake gestured to the cargo hauler he'd finished hours ago. "Is she dangerous?" One of the other Vorthens spoke up. "She's a fugitive from justice. Anyone harboring her will face severe consequences." "Of course," Jake said, nodding earnestly. "I'll definitely contact security if I see anything." Vex studied Jake for a long moment, and Jake fought the urge to fidget under that intense stare. Finally, the commander gestured to his subordinates. "Search the shop." Jake's blood turned to ice, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Search away. Though I should warn you, some of this equipment is pretty delicate. I'd hate for anything to get damaged." The Vorthens moved through the shop with methodical efficiency, checking every corner and crevice large enough to hide a person. Jake watched them work, trying to keep his expression neutral while his heart hammered against his ribs. When one of the enforcers approached the area where Kira was hidden, Jake had to clench his fists to keep his hands from shaking. The Vorthen examined the floor panels, running his gauntlet hands along the edges. Jake held his breath, knowing that if they found the hidden compartment, both he and Kira were finished. After what felt like an eternity, the enforcer moved on to another area. The search continued for nearly 20 minutes before Vex finally called his men back to the front of the shop. Jake had somehow managed to maintain his facade of helpful cooperation throughout the entire ordeal, even offering the Vorthens refreshments at one point. "The prisoner is not here," Vex announced, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with that conclusion. "But you will contact us immediately if you see anything." "Understood, human." "Absolutely, Commander. You can count on me." After the Vorthens left, Jake waited a full 10 minutes before opening Kira's hiding place. She emerged pale and shaking, her earlier improvement erased by the stress of the close call. "They'll be back," she said, accepting another cup of water from Jake. "They won't stop looking until they find me." "Then maybe it's time you told me the truth," Jake said. "Who are you really? And why are the Vorthens so determined to catch you?" Kira looked into her water cup, watching the liquid swirl as her hands trembled. When she finally looked up, her violet eyes held a depth of sadness that seemed far too old for her apparent age. "My father was Dr. Eldon Thane," she said. "He was the chief researcher for the Zephyrian Colonial Authority's terraforming project. 3 months ago, he discovered something that the Vorthens didn't want anyone to know about." "What kind of something?" "Evidence that the Vorthens have been systematically poisoning the worlds they claim to be helping terraform. They're not preparing those planets for colonization. They're making them uninhabitable for anyone except themselves. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The Vorthons controlled terraforming operations across dozens of systems, affecting billions of potential colonists from various species. If what Kira was saying was true, my father tried to expose them, Kira continued. He compiled all the evidence and prepared to present it to the Galactic Council. But before he could, the Vorthons arrested our entire research team for sedition against the colonial authority. Where's your father now? Kira's voice broke slightly. Dead. They executed him and the rest of the team 3 days ago. I only escaped because... She paused, struggling with the words. Because I wasn't supposed to be there. Officially, I don't exist. What do you mean? My father never registered my birth. My mother died when I was very young, and he was afraid the authorities would take me away if they knew about me. So he kept me hidden, taught me everything himself. As far as the official records are concerned, Kira Thane was never born. Jake began to understand the magnitude of the situation. Kira wasn't just a witness to Vorthon crimes. She was living proof that those crimes had been serious enough to warrant murdering an entire research team. And because she didn't officially exist, the Vorthons could make her disappear without anyone ever knowing she'd been there. Do you have the evidence? The data your father compiled? Kira reached into her torn jumpsuit and pulled out a small data crystal, its surface gleaming in the shop's artificial light. Everything's on here. Soil analyses, atmospheric readings, chemical compositions, proof of what they've done to 17 different worlds. Jake stared at the crystal, realizing he was looking at something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. In the right hands, that data could bring down the Vorthon colonial authority and save countless lives. But in the wrong hands, you can't stay here, he said finally. It's too dangerous for both of us. The Vorthons will keep searching, and eventually they'll figure out you're here. I know, but I have nowhere else to go. And even if I could get off the station, who would believe me? I am nobody, just a girl who doesn't even exist. Jake looked at Kira's exhausted face and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Then I guess I'll have to help you exist. Hashtag the alien girl pleaded for water. Part 2. Jake spent the next hour pacing around his shop while Kira rested on the break room couch. His mind was racing through possibilities, each one seeming more impossible than the last. Getting Kira off Epsilon Station would require forged identification, passage on a ship, and enough credits to make it all happen without attracting attention. Jake had maybe 300 credits to his name and no connections to the kind of people who could manufacture false documents. But humans had one advantage that most other species overlooked. They were incredibly stubborn when they decided to help someone. Jake pulled up his personal terminal and began researching ship departures. Most of the vessels currently docked at Epsilon Station were either Vorthon military ships or commercial freighters with Vorthon crews. Getting passage on one of those would be impossible. But there were a few independent operators, mostly smugglers and traders who worked the edges of civilized space. One name caught his attention: Captain Sarah Chun, pilot of a modified cargo hauler called the Resilient. Jake had done some repair work on her ship a few months back when she'd had engine trouble. Chun was human, which meant she might be more sympathetic to their situation. More importantly, she had a reputation for not asking too many questions about her cargo. The problem was finding her. Independent freighter captains didn't exactly advertise their locations, especially ones who operated in the gray areas of galactic commerce. Jake was still studying the departure schedules when Kira appeared in the doorway of the break room. She looked better after a rest, though her torn jumpsuit and the dried blood in her hair still made her look like a refugee from a war zone. You should leave, she said quietly. I've brought enough danger to you already. Not happening, Jake replied without looking up from his terminal. We just need to figure out how to get you somewhere safe. There is nowhere safe for me. The Vorthons control most of the settled systems. Even if we could somehow get to the Galactic Council, they'd just hand me over. The Vorthons have too much political influence. Jake finally turned away from his terminal to look at her. So what's your plan? Hide in maintenance tunnels until they find you. Kira was quiet for a moment. I plan to find a way to transmit my father's data to as many news networks as possible before they caught me. Even if they kill me, at least the truth would be out there. That's not a plan. That's a suicide mission. Sometimes that's all you have left. Jake studied her face, seeing the resignation in her violet eyes. She'd already accepted that she was going to die. The only question in her mind was whether her death would accomplish anything meaningful. It was a kind of courage that Jake had rarely seen, and it made him more determined than ever to find another way. "There's someone I need to find," he said. "A ship captain who might be able to help. But it'll take some time to track her down." "How much time?" "Maybe a day, maybe more." "Can you stay hidden that long?" Kira nodded. "I've gotten good at staying hidden." Jake began making preparations for a longer stay. He moved some of his emergency supplies into the break room and showed Kira where everything was. Then he went to work on creating better hiding places in case the Vorthons returned. Behind his main workbench, Jake discovered that one of the wall panels could be removed to reveal a narrow space between his shop and the adjacent storage facility. It wasn't comfortable, but someone Kira's size could fit in there and remain hidden even during a thorough search. Jake also rigged up a simple communication system using some old comlink parts, so Kira could hear what was happening in the main shop without being seen. While he worked, Kira told him more about her father's research. Dr. Eldon Thane had been one of the galaxy's leading experts on atmospheric engineering. When a Zephyrian colonial authority contracted him to analyze potential colony worlds, he'd been excited about the opportunity to help establish new settlements for their growing population. What he'd found instead was evidence of a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of Vorthon society. The terraforming process should create atmospheres suitable for a variety of species, Kira explained. That's the whole point, to make worlds that can support diverse colonial populations. But my father's analysis showed that every world the Vorthons terraformed had atmospheric compositions that were toxic to anyone except Vorthons themselves. Could it have been incompetence? Poor terraforming techniques. That's what my father thought at first. But then he looked at the patterns. The chemical signatures were too consistent, too precise. Someone was deliberately introducing specific compounds that would make the air unbreathable for non-Vorthons. Jake felt sick as the implications hit him. They're not terraforming worlds for colonization. They're claiming them for themselves. Exactly. And once the other species discover the worlds are uninhabitable, the Vorthons offer to fix the problem in exchange for exclusive mining and development rights. It's the perfect scam. They get paid to ruin the worlds, then get paid again to keep them. How many colonies has this affected? 17 that my father documented, with at least a dozen more in the planning stages. We're talking about millions of potential colonists who will never get the chance to build new lives because the Vorthons want to expand their territory. Jake absorbed this information while he continued working on the hiding places. The scope of the Vorthon conspiracy was staggering. But even more staggering was the fact that a teenage girl and a human mechanic were apparently the only people in a position to do anything about it. As the station's artificial day cycle progressed, Jake began his search for Captain Chen. He started by checking the obvious places: the commercial docking registers, the customs manifests, the cargo handling schedules. But Chen's ship wasn't listed anywhere, which either meant she wasn't currently docked at Epsilon Station or she was staying off the official records. Jake's next stop was Murphy's Cantina, the grimy bar where most of the station's independent operators did their drinking and deal-making. Murphy himself was a gruff former cargo handler who'd lost his left arm in a loading accident and used his disability settlement to buy the cantina. He knew everyone who passed through the station and made it his business to stay informed about who was who in the local smuggling community. Chun. Murphy scratched his graying beard with his remaining hand. Haven't seen her in weeks. Word is she's been running jobs out in the Kepler sector. Dangerous work, but it pays well. Any idea when she might be back? Could be tomorrow, could be next month. Independent freighter captains don't exactly keep regular schedules. Jake bought a drink he didn't want and considered his options. If Chen wasn't available, he needed to find someone else willing to transport a fugitive wanted by the Vorthons. It wasn't going to be easy. He was about to leave the cantina when someone slid into the booth across from him. Jake looked up to see a woman with short brown hair and weathered skin, wearing the kind of practical clothing favored by spacers. There was something familiar about her face. "Jake Martinez?" she asked. "Depends who's asking." "Sarah Chun. Murphy said you were looking for me." Jake nearly choked on his drink. "You're here?" "But," Murphy says a lot of things. Most of them designed to keep certain people from finding me. Chin studied Jake with sharp green eyes. "Question is, why are you looking for me? Last time we met, you fixed my engines and I paid you." Figured that was the end of our business. Jake glanced around the cantina, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. "I need passage off the station for someone. Someone the Vorthins are looking for." Chin's expression didn't change, but Jake caught a slight tightening around her eyes. "That sounds like the kind of trouble I tried to avoid. It's not what you think. The person isn't a criminal. She's a witness to something the Vorthins want to keep quiet. Let me guess, she knows something that could embarrass them politically? Try something that could bring down their entire colonial authority." That got Chin's attention. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What kind of something?" Jake hesitated. He was about to trust a woman he barely knew with information that could get them all killed. But, looking at Chin's face, he saw something that gave him hope, the same stubborn determination that had led him to help Kira in the first place. Evidence of systematic terraforming fraud affecting 17 worlds and millions of potential colonists. Chin was quiet for a long moment, digesting this information. "That's a big claim. You have proof." She has a data crystal with everything. Chemical analyses, atmospheric readings, all of it compiled by one of the galaxy's leading terraforming experts before the Vorthins executed him. And, let me guess, she's the expert's daughter? "How did you—" Because that's always how these stories go. The hero's family gets killed, the hero escapes with crucial information, and then some poor bastard like me has to decide whether to risk everything to help them. Chin took a sip from her own drink. "What makes you think I'm that kind of poor bastard?" Jake chose his words carefully. "Because you're human. And humans have a bad habit of doing the right thing, even when it's stupid." Chin actually smiled at that. "You know what the going rate is for transporting fugitives wanted by the Vorthins?" "I've got 300 credits. The going rate is 50,000 credits. Plus expense. Plus hazard pay." Jake's heart sank. "I don't have that kind of money." "I know you don't." Chin finished her drink and stood up. "But here's the thing about us humans and our bad habits. Sometimes we do the right thing, even when we don't get paid for it." Jake stared at her. "Are you saying you'll help?" "I'm saying I'll take a look at your witness and her evidence. If it's legitimate, and if she's really just a kid trying to expose Vorthin crimes, then maybe we can work something out." "When?" "Tonight, after the station settles down for the sleep cycle. Bring her to docking Bay 7. That's where I keep my ship when I don't want to advertise my presence." Chin walked away before Jake could respond, leaving him alone with his half-finished drink and a mixture of hope and terror. He'd found someone willing to help, but now came the hard part, getting Kira to the docking bay without being caught. Jake returned to his shop to find Kira exactly where he'd left her, sitting in the break room and staring at the data crystal that contained her father's life work. She looked up when he entered, and Jake could see the question in her eyes. "I found someone," he said, "a ship captain who might be willing to help. But we need to meet her tonight. How do we know we can trust her?" "We don't. But right now, she's our best option." Kira nodded slowly. "What do we need to do?" Jake outlined the plan as he saw it. They'd wait until the station's sleep cycle began, when most of the corridors would be empty. Then, they'd make their way to docking Bay 7 using the maintenance tunnels Jake had become familiar with during his 3 years on the station. It wasn't a sophisticated plan, but sometimes simple was better. As they waited for nightfall, Jake found himself studying Kira more closely. Despite everything she'd been through, losing her father, being hunted by the Vorthins, nearly dying of dehydration, she maintained a quiet dignity that impressed him. She didn't complain about her situation or demand that Jake take additional risks on her behalf. She simply accepted help when it was offered, and prepare to do whatever was necessary to honor her father's sacrifice. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. Jake looked up from the maintenance scanner he'd been pretending to calibrate. "What do you mean? You don't know me. You've never met my father. This conspiracy doesn't affect humans directly. The Vorthans aren't planning to poison any Earth colonies. So why risk everything to help me?" It was a fair question, and Jake found himself struggling to answer it. Why was he risking his career, his freedom, maybe even his life for someone he'd known for less than a day? "My grandfather used to tell me stories," he said finally. "Stories about the old days on Earth, when humans were still figuring out how to live together. He said the worst atrocities happened when good people decided that someone else's problem wasn't their responsibility. And you think this is your responsibility? I think if we don't help each other, nobody else will." Kira was quiet for a moment. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." He was. He also said that the universe has a way of testing whether you really believe the things you say you believe. And this is your test. Jake looked at her violet eyes, still bright despite everything she'd endured. "Maybe, or maybe it's yours." When a station's lights dimmed to simulate nighttime, Jake and Kira prepared to leave. Jake had found some spare coveralls that more or less fit Kira, helping her look less like an escaped prisoner. He'd also rigged up a portable scanner that would warn them if anyone was approaching through the tunnels. The journey to Docking Bay 7 took nearly an hour, following a circuitous route through maintenance shafts and service corridors. Twice they had to hide while station personnel passed by, but most of the staff were focused on their own duties and paid no attention to the maintenance areas. Docking Bay 7 was in one of the older sections of Epsilon Station, where the artificial gravity was slightly weaker and the air recycling systems worked overtime to filter out the smell of industrial lubricants. Jake had been there a few times to work on ships that couldn't afford the premium docking fees in the main commercial areas. Chen's ship, the Resilient, was exactly what Jake had expected from an independent freighter captain. It was a modified cargo hauler, probably 50 years old, with mismatched hull plating that spoke of countless repairs and upgrades. The ship looked like it had been through a war, but Jake knew from experience that appearances could be deceiving. Under all that wear and weathering, the Resilient was probably one of the most reliable vessels on the station. Chen was waiting for them at the ship's cargo ramp. She'd changed from her cantina clothes into a practical jumpsuit, and Jake noticed the worn grip of a sidearm holstered at her hip. When she saw Kira, her expression softened slightly. "You're younger than I expected," she said. "Does that matter?" Kira asked. "It means I'm even more motivated to get you away from the Vorthans." Chun led them up the cargo ramp and into the ship's interior. The Resilient was cramped but efficiently organized, with every inch of space serving multiple purposes. Jake could see modifications everywhere: enhanced shielding, upgraded engines, and what looked like a very illegal sensor jamming array. "Show me the data," Chen said once they were settled in the ship's small galley. Kira handed over the crystal, and Chun inserted it into a portable reader. For the next 20 minutes, she scrolled through Dr. Thane's research, her expression growing darker with each page. Finally, she set the reader aside and looked at Kira. "This is legitimate," she said, "and it's explosive. If this gets out, it'll cause a political earthquake that reaches all the way to the Galactic Council. So you'll help us?" Jake asked. Chun was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks. "Getting you off Epsilon Station is the easy part," she said finally. "The hard part is figuring out where to take you. The Vorthans have influence everywhere. Where would you suggest?" "There's a human colony in the Proxima system called Haven. It's far enough from Vorthan space that they can't easily reach you, and the colonial government there has a reputation for standing up to alien intimidation." "How long would it take to get there?" 2 weeks if we push the engines. "But there's another problem. The Vorthans will know you're gone as soon as they search Jake's shop again. They'll put out alerts to every spaceport in the sector." Jake felt his stomach clench. He hadn't fully considered what would happen to him after Kira left. "Maybe I should come with you." "No," Kira said firmly. "You've done enough. I won't let you abandon your entire life because of me. My life isn't worth much if I can't look at myself in the mirror. Chen held up a hand. Before we make any decisions about who's going where, we need to address the elephant in the room. This data is useless unless someone with credibility presents it. A teenage girl with no official existence isn't going to convince anyone. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we need to think bigger. We need allies, people with influence who can make sure this information gets to the right places. Jake saw where she was going. You have someone in mind. Maybe, but it's complicated. Before Chun could explain further, an alarm began blaring throughout the docking bay. Emergency lights bathed everything in harsh red illumination, and a voice echoed from the station's public address system. Attention, all personnel. Epsilon Station is now under security lockdown. No ships may depart without authorization from Vorthen Command. This is not a drill. Chun cursed under her breath and moved to her ship's control console. They found your shop, she said to Jake. And now they're sealing the station. Through the viewport, Jake could see Vorthen enforcer teams spreading throughout the docking bay, checking every ship and questioning every person they found. They had maybe minutes before the search reached the Resilient. Can we launch anyway? Kira asked. Not without getting blown apart by the station's defense grid, Chen replied grimly. We're trapped. Hashtag the alien girl pleaded for water. Part 3. Jake watched through the viewport as Vorthen enforcers moved systematically through the docking bay, their black armor gleaming under the emergency lights. They were being thorough, checking every cargo container and questioning every person they encountered. At their current pace, they'd reach the Resilient within 10 minutes. Options? Chun asked tersely, her fingers dancing over the ship's control panel. Can you hide us somewhere on the ship? Kira suggested. Not from a Vorthen search. They have sensors that can detect life signs through most types of shielding. Jake studied the layout of the docking bay, his mechanics mind automatically cataloging possible escape routes. What about the waste processing system? The Vorthens might not think to check there. They'll check everywhere, Chun said grimly. And even if we could hide from them, we can't stay here forever. Eventually, they'll bring in equipment that can scan every molecule on this ship. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from outside as the Vorthen search team approached their section of the docking bay. Jake could hear them questioning the crew of a nearby cargo hauler, their voices carrying the authority of absolute power. Suddenly, Chen's expression changed. Wait, there might be one option. What kind of option? Jake asked. The kind that's probably going to get us all killed. Chun moved to a communications console and began entering a complex sequence of codes. I'm sending a priority message to someone who might be able to help, but it's a long shot. Who? Later. Right now, we need to buy some time. Chun moved to a storage locker and pulled out what looked like a standard maintenance kit. Jake, you're about to become my ship's engineer. Kira, you're my cargo specialist. If the Vorthens ask, we're conducting routine maintenance before our next run. Jake understood immediately. You want us to pretend we belong here. It's better than hiding and hoping they don't find us. Chen handed them both work coveralls and led them to the ship's engine compartment. Start taking apart that power coupling, she told Jake. Make it look like you're diagnosing a problem. Kira, organize those spare parts like you're preparing for a complex repair. The plan was desperate and probably doomed to fail, but it was better than waiting helplessly for capture. Jake began dismantling the power coupling with practiced efficiency, while Kira sorted through bins of spare components. Chun positioned herself at the engine room's entrance, ready to greet their unwelcome visitors. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped just outside the Resilience cargo ramp. Captain Chun. The voice was unmistakably Vorthen, deep, authoritative, and carrying just a hint of reptilian sibilance. By order of Station Command, prepare your vessel for inspection. Of course, Commander, Chen called back. Though I should warn you, we're in the middle of some engine maintenance. Had some plasma leaks in the propulsion system. Jake heard multiple sets of boots climbing the cargo ramp, followed by the whir of electronic equipment. The Vorthens had brought scanning gear with them. Where is your crew? The commander demanded. Engine room, Chen replied. Trying to fix the problem before it gets worse. You're welcome to observe, but please be careful around the exposed power couplings. Human safety regulations, you understand. Jake forced himself to continue working as the Vorthans approached the engine room. Through his peripheral vision, he could see 3 armored figures entering the compartment, their helmet-mounted sensors sweeping across everything in sight. "You there," the commander said, pointing at Jake. "State your name and position." Jake looked up from his work, trying to appear mildly annoyed at the interruption. "Jake Martinez, ship's engineer. And unless you want to explain to Captain Chun why her next cargo run got delayed, I'd appreciate it if you let me finish this repair." The commander studied Jake for a moment, then turned his attention to Kira. "And you?" "Kira Vel," Kira said, using the false name Chun had whispered to her moments before. "Cargo specialist. I'm cataloging the parts we need for the repair." Jake held his breath, wondering if the Vorthans would recognize Kira despite her disguise. But the commander seemed more interested in their scanning equipment than in individual crew members. "Run a full spectrum analysis," he ordered one of his subordinates. "I want to know everything that's been on this ship in the past 72 hours. The next few minutes were among the longest of Jake's life. The Vorthan scanners hummed and beeped as they analyzed every surface, every component, every trace of biological material in the engine room. Jake continued his repair work, forcing his hands to remain steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Finally, the scanning technician looked up from his equipment. "Standard human biosignatures throughout the ship, Commander. No anomalos readings." The commander seemed disappointed. "What about the cargo manifest?" "Industrial components bound for the Kepler sector," Chen replied promptly. "Machine parts mostly. I can show you the documentation if you'd like." "That won't be necessary." The commander gestured to his team. "Continue the search. Check every ship in this section." As the Vorthans left the Resilient, Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. Somehow, impossibly, they'd managed to fool the search team. But he knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. How did they not detect Kira's biosignature? He asked Chen once the Vorthans were gone. "Simple," Chen replied with a grim smile. "I've been smuggling people for 15 years. You think I'd operate without biological masking technology?" Jake stared at her. "You're a people smuggler?" "Among other things. Though I prefer to think of myself as a transportation specialist with flexible ethical standards." "And you didn't think to mention this earlier? Would it have changed anything? You still would have needed my help." Kira looked between them, confusion clear in her violet eyes. "What's biological masking technology?" "It scrambles sensor readings," Chen explained. "Makes one species' biosignature look like another. The Vorthans thought you were human because that's what my ship's sensors told them you were." "That's incredibly illegal," Jake said. "So is harboring fugitives. So is conspiring against the Vorthan colonial authority. So is pretty much everything we've done in the past 24 hours. Chun moved to her communications console. "The question is, are we going to keep breaking laws, or are we going to give up and let the Vorthans win?" Before anyone could answer, the console chimed with an incoming message. Chun read it quickly, her expression shifting from hope to concern to something that might have been excitement. "Well," she said finally, "that was unexpected. Good news or bad news?" Jake asked. "Both. The good news is that my contact is willing to help. The bad news is that helping us requires them to take enormous personal risks." "What kind of help are we talking about?" Chen turned to face them, her expression serious. "The kind that could actually win this war instead of just helping one person escape." Before she could explain further, alarms began blaring again throughout the station. But this time, the tone was different, sharper, more urgent. "Attention all personnel," the station's AI announced. "We are receiving priority communications from an unscheduled arrival. All docking bay personnel report to emergency stations." Through the viewport, Jake could see a new ship approaching Epsilon Station. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of the Resilient, with sleek lines and advanced hull plating that marked it as a state-of-the-art vessel. More importantly, it bore the distinctive markings of the Galactic Council. "That's a Council diplomatic ship," Chun said, her voice filled with amazement. "What's it doing here?" More importantly, Jake added. Why does its arrival feel like incredibly convenient timing? Chen's smile returned, wider than before. Because I may have mentioned in my message that we had evidence of Vorthan war crimes. Turns out the Council has been looking for an excuse to investigate Vorthan activities for quite some time. You contacted the Galactic Council? Kira asked, hope and fear warring in her voice. Not directly. I contacted someone I know who works for them. Someone I trust. Chen paused. Someone who happens to be my sister. The implications of this revelation were still sinking in when Jake noticed movement in the docking bay. The Vorthan enforcers who had been conducting searches were now moving toward the station's command center, clearly responding to the unexpected arrival of the Council ship. This is our chance, Chen said. While the Vorthans are distracted with their diplomatic crisis, we can move freely around the station. Move where? Jake asked. To meet with the Council representatives. If we're going to expose the Vorthan conspiracy, we need to do it properly, with official witnesses and legal protections. Kira clutched the data crystal tightly. But what if they don't believe us? What if the Vorthans convince them that we're the criminals? Then, we're no worse off than we are now, Jake pointed out. And at least we'll have tried. Chen was already moving toward the ship's exit. My sister's name is Admiral Lisa Chun. She's the Council's chief investigator for colonial affairs. If anyone can make sure this evidence gets the attention it deserves, it's her. As they prepared to leave the Resilient, Jake found himself thinking about the chain of events that had brought them to this point. Less than 2 days ago, he'd been a simple mechanic, worried about nothing more complicated than fixing engines and paying his rent. Now he was about to meet with representatives of the Galactic Council to expose a conspiracy that could reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. It was terrifying. It was dangerous. And it was absolutely the right thing to do. The journey through Epsilon Station felt surreal. The corridors that had seemed threatening just hours before were now filled with a buzz of activity as station personnel tried to accommodate their unexpected VIP guests. Vorthan enforcers stood at attention at regular intervals, but their attention was focused on maintaining security for the diplomatic visit rather than hunting for fugitives. Chun led them through a series of passages that Jake hadn't known existed, corridors marked with diplomatic immunity symbols and guarded by neutral security forces rather than Vorthan troops. It was a reminder that even on a Vorthan-controlled station, there were still pockets of independent authority. The Council ship had docked at one of the station's premium berths, and the docking bay around it buzzed with activity. Jake could see crew members unloading diplomatic equipment, while a small army of translators and protocol officers prepared for what was clearly going to be a complex negotiation. There, Chun pointed to a woman in a council uniform who was directing the unloading operation. That's Lisa. Admiral Lisa Chun was an older version of Sarah, with the same sharp eyes and practical demeanor, but wearing the kind of uniform that spoke of high-level authority. When she saw Sarah approaching, her expression shifted from professional concentration to personal concern. Sarah, what are you doing here? I told you to wait for my signal. Change of plans, Sarah replied. The situation is more urgent than we thought. Lisa's gaze moved to Jake and Kira, taking in their appearance with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating potential assets and threats. These are your sources? Jake Martinez, ship mechanic, Sarah said by way of introduction. And this is Kira Thane, daughter of Dr. Eldon Thane. Lisa's expression sharpened. Thane? The terraforming expert who was executed for sedition. The same, Kira said, stepping forward. Except he wasn't a seditious criminal. He was a scientist who discovered evidence of Vorthan war crimes. That's a serious accusation. I have proof. Kira held up the data crystal. Lisa studied the crystal, then looked around the busy docking bay. This isn't the place for this conversation. Follow me. She led them onto the council ship, through corridors that spoke of advanced technology and unlimited resources. Everything was pristine, efficient, and designed to project the authority of galactic civilization. The ship's briefing room was a study in understated power. The walls were lined with displays showing real-time information from across the galaxy, and the conference table could accommodate representatives from dozens of different species. Lisa activated a privacy field around the table before gesturing for them to sit. "Before we go any further," she said, "I need you to understand what you're asking me to do. If this evidence is genuine, acting on it will mean accusing one of the Council's most influential member species of systematic fraud and colonial manipulation. The political consequences will be enormous. And if the evidence is genuine, but we don't act on it," Jake asked, "how many more worlds will be poisoned? How many more colonies will fail?" Lisa looked at him with something that might have been approval. "You're human. Is that a problem?" "On the contrary, humans have a useful tendency to focus on moral imperatives rather than political consequences." Lisa turned to Kira. "Show me what your father discovered." For the next hour, Kira walked them through Dr. Thane's research. The data was comprehensive and damning. Chemical analyses that proved deliberate contamination, atmospheric readings that showed systematic manipulation, and communications intercepts that revealed coordination between Vorthan officials and terraforming teams. When Kira finished her presentation, the room was quiet except for the hum of the ship's systems. Lisa sat back in her chair, her expression grave. "This is worse than I expected," she said finally. "If this data is accurate, the Vorthans have committed crimes against millions of potential colonists across 17 star systems." "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we find out whether the Galactic Council has the courage to confront one of its most powerful members." Lisa stood and moved to the room's communications console. "I'm calling an emergency session of the Colonial Affairs Committee. Every representative will see this evidence before the day is over." "And the Vorthans?" Jake asked. "They're not going to just accept this quietly." "No, they're not." Lisa's expression was grim. "Which is why you three are now under official council protection. Whatever happens next, the Vorthans won't be able to simply make you disappear." As if summoned by her words, the ship's communications system chimed with an incoming message. A holographic display materialized above the conference table, showing the scaled features of a high-ranking Vorthan official. "Admiral Chun," the Vorthan said, his voice carrying barely controlled anger. "I am Commander Drex of the Colonial Authority. I believe you have something that belongs to us." "I have 3 individuals under council protection," Lisa replied evenly. "If you have legal claims against them, you're welcome to present those claims to the appropriate council committees. The female is a known terrorist who has been spreading seditious propaganda against the Colonial Authority. We demand her immediate extradition." Kira tensed, but Lisa's expression didn't change. "I've reviewed the evidence in question, Commander. What I see is documentation of scientific research conducted by a legitimate expert in terraforming technology. If you have evidence that contradicts these findings, I encourage you to present it to the Colonial Affairs Committee." Drex's reptilian features twisted with fury. "You are making a grave mistake, Admiral. The Colonial Authority will not forget this interference. Nor will the Galactic Council forget the evidence we've uncovered." The communication cut off, leaving them in tense silence. "Well," Sarah said finally, "I guess that settles it. We're officially at war with the Vorthans." "Not yet," Lisa corrected. "But we will be if this evidence proves to be accurate." "You still have doubts?" Jake asked. "I have to. When you're accusing an entire species of systematic war crimes, you'd better be absolutely certain of your facts." Lisa turned to Kira. "Which is why we're going to need more than just your father's research." "What do you mean?" "I'm going to need to examine one of these poison worlds firsthand. We need to collect independent samples, run our own tests, and build a case that even the Vorthans can't dispute." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "You want to go to one of the affected systems?" "I want to take a council investigation team to the most recently contaminated world and document exactly what the Vorthans have done." Lisa's expression was determined. "And I want all 3 of you to come with us as witnesses." "That sounds incredibly dangerous," Sarah pointed out. "It is. The Vorthans will do everything in their power to stop us from gathering that evidence." "Then why do it?" Lisa looked at each of them in turn, her gaze finally settling on Kira. "Because sometimes the right thing to do is also the dangerous thing to do." and because a teenage girl was brave enough to carry her father's research out of hell to make sure the truth didn't die with him. Kira straightened in her chair, and Jake saw something new in her violet eyes. Not just determination, but purpose. "When do we leave?" she asked. Hashtag the alien girl pleaded for water. Part 4. The Council investigation ship Meridian was the most advanced vessel Jake had ever set foot on. Unlike the cramped, practical spaces of independent freighters, the Meridian was designed for long-range missions with full diplomatic and scientific capabilities. Jake found himself sharing quarters with Sarah while Kira had been given her own cabin, the first private space she'd had since escaping from the Vorthons. Admiral Lisa Chun had assembled an impressive team for the mission. There were atmospheric specialists, soil analysis experts, legal observers, and enough security personnel to handle potential Vorthon interference. The destination was Kepler Prime, one of the 17 worlds Dr. Thane had identified as contaminated. The Vorthons completed their terraforming work on Kepler Prime 6 months ago. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the mission's chief atmospheric scientist, explained during their first briefing. According to their reports, the planet should now be suitable for multiple species colonization. The first wave of settlers is scheduled to arrive next month. "Except they'll all die if they try to breathe the air," Kira said grimly. "That's what we're here to determine," Lisa replied. "We need irrefutable proof before we can make formal accusations." The journey to Kepler Prime took 4 days, during which Jake found himself working closely with the ship's engineering team. They were impressed by his practical knowledge and ability to adapt to their advanced systems, while Jake was amazed by the technological capabilities at their disposal. Kira spent most of her time with Dr. Rodriguez and the other scientists, helping them understand her father's research methods and the specific contamination signatures they should look for. Jake was pleased to see color returning to her face and strength to her voice as she found purpose in continuing her father's work. Sarah, meanwhile, had been integrated into the mission's security planning. Her knowledge of smuggling routes and independent ship movements proved valuable for understanding how the Vorthons might try to intercept the investigation. On the 3rd day out from Epsilon Station, their first real challenge arose. "Admiral," the ship's communication officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from a Vorthon patrol fleet. They're ordering us to change course." Lisa moved to the bridge's main display, which showed 3 large Vorthon warships positioned directly across their planned route to Kepler Prime. Each ship was easily twice the size of the Meridian, with enough firepower to reduce the Council vessel to space debris. "Put them through," Lisa ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the imposing figure of a Vorthon fleet commander. His armor was more ornate than the enforcers Jake had encountered on Epsilon Station, marking him as high-ranking military rather than civilian security. "Council Vessel Meridian," the commander said. "I am Fleet Commander Zarek of the Vorthon Defense Force. You are approaching a restricted military exercise area. Alter your course immediately." "Commander Zarek," Lisa replied smoothly. "This is Admiral Chun conducting an official Council investigation under Article 7 of the Galactic Colonial Accord. We have full diplomatic immunity for this mission. Your diplomatic immunity does not extend to active military zones. The safety of your vessel cannot be guaranteed if you proceed." Lisa gestured to one of her officers, who quickly pulled up navigation charts. Jake could see that the military exercise area conveniently encompassed the entire Kepler system, making it impossible to reach their destination without violating Vorthon restrictions. "Interesting timing for military exercises," Lisa observed. "How long will these maneuvers continue?" "Indefinitely." The threat was clear. The Vorthons were prepared to block Council access to Kepler Prime for as long as necessary to prevent the investigation from proceeding. "Admiral," Sarah said quietly, "there might be another way to get to the planet." Lisa turned to her. "Explain." "The Vorthon Patrol is focused on monitoring standard hyperspace routes. But there are other ways to reach Kepler Prime, smuggler routes through the asteroid fields on the system's edge. They'd never expect a Council ship to use those passages. Would the Meridian be able to navigate such routes?" "Not the Meridian," Sarah admitted, "but my ship could. And it's small enough to avoid detection if we're careful. Jake saw where she was going with this. You want to take a small team to the planet's surface while the main investigation ship waits out here. Exactly. We collect the evidence we need, then rendezvous with the Meridian outside the system. Lisa considered this for several minutes, clearly weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Finally, she turned to Dr. Rodriguez. Can you conduct the necessary analysis with portable equipment? It won't be as comprehensive as what we could do with the ship's main laboratory, but yes, we can get the chemical signatures and atmospheric readings we need, and the legal requirements. As long as we have proper chain of custody for the samples and certified observers for the data collection, it will hold up in a council tribunal. Lisa nodded slowly. Very well. Captain Shun, you'll take a small team to Kepler Prime aboard your vessel. Dr. Rodriguez will lead the scientific component, with Mr. Martinez providing technical support and Ms. Thanes serving as an expert witness. What about security? Sarah asked. I'm assigning Lieutenant Morrison and a small protection detail. If the Vorthans discover your presence on the planet, you'll need to be able to defend yourselves. The mission planning took most of the remaining day. The Meridian would continue on its original course, making it appear as though they had accepted the Vorthan restrictions and were leaving the system. Meanwhile, Sarah's team would use the asteroid field to approach Kepler Prime undetected. The good news is that Kepler Prime is supposed to be uninhabited, Lieutenant Morrison explained during their final briefing. No Vorthan ground forces to worry about. The bad news is that if something goes wrong, we'll be completely on our own until we can rendezvous with the Meridian. As they prepared to transfer to the Resilient, Jake found himself thinking about how much his life had changed in just a few days. A week ago, his biggest concern had been whether he could afford to upgrade his shop's diagnostic equipment. Now he was about to conduct industrial espionage against one of the galaxy's most powerful species. Second thoughts? Kira asked as they loaded scientific equipment onto Sarah's ship. About 1,000 of them, Jake admitted. But none of them are going to stop me from seeing this through. Why? Jake considered the question. Because your father died trying to expose the truth. The least I can do is make sure that truth actually gets heard. The Resilient was cramped with 6 additional people and scientific equipment aboard, but Sarah had managed to make room for everyone. Dr. Rodriguez and her assistant had set up a mobile laboratory in the cargo hold, while Lieutenant Morrison's security team had established defensive positions near the ship's entrances. The journey through the asteroid field to Kepler Prime was nerve-wracking. Sarah navigated by instruments alone, following paths that existed more in her memory than on any official charts. Several times they had to change course to avoid Vorthan patrol ships, their passive sensors barely detecting the distant signatures of military vessels. There, Sarah said finally, pointing to the main display. Kepler Prime. The planet was beautiful from orbit, blue oceans, white clouds, and continents that showed the green of flourishing vegetation. It looked like exactly the kind of world that millions of colonists would be eager to call home. Atmospheric readings? Dr. Rodriguez asked. Her assistant consulted the ship's sensors. Oxygen-nitrogen mix, suitable pressure, temperature within acceptable ranges for most species. According to these readings, the air is perfectly breathable. According to those readings, Kira said. But we need to test actual samples, not just scan from orbit. Sarah found a landing site near one of Dr. Thane's original survey locations, a region that his data indicated should show the highest concentrations of contamination. The Resilient touched down in a meadow, surrounded by what looked like Earth-normal deciduous trees. Environmental suits, Morrison ordered as they prepared to exit the ship. Until we know exactly what we're dealing with, nobody breathes the local air. The initial readings were confusing. Dr. Rodriguez's portable equipment confirmed that the atmosphere contained the expected mix of gases in the right proportions. Temperature, humidity, and pressure were all within normal ranges. By every standard measurement, Kepler Prime was a perfectly habitable world. Run the chemical analysis, Kira suggested. Look for the specific compounds my father identified. Dr. Rodriguez began setting up her more sophisticated testing equipment, while Jake and Morrison established a security perimeter around their landing site. The landscape was eerily quiet. No sounds of animal life, no insects, no birds. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and the distant sound of waves from a nearby coastline. "That's strange," Dr. Rodriguez muttered as she studied her readings. "What is it?" "I'm definitely detecting the compounds Dr. Thane identified in his research, but the concentrations are much lower than his data suggested." "Maybe the contamination has dispersed over time?" Jake suggested. "No, that's not how these chemicals work. They're designed to be stable in atmospheric conditions." Dr. Rodriguez frowned at her equipment. "It's almost as if someone has been treating the contamination." Kira looked sharply at the scientist. "Treating it how?" "I'm detecting traces of neutralizing agents, compounds that would break down the toxic materials and render them harmless." "That doesn't make sense," Morrison said. "Why would the Vorthans contaminate the planet and then clean it up?" Jake was beginning to understand. "Because they're planning to colonize it themselves." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. They poison the planet so other species can't live here. Then, once they've claimed exclusive rights to the world, they clean it up and move in their own people." Dr. Rodriguez was nodding as she continued her analysis. The neutralizing process would take months to complete. During that time, they could legitimately claim that the planet was unsuitable for colonization while they worked to fix the problems. "Except the problems were ones they created in the first place," Kira said. "And once the neutralization is complete," Jake continued, "they have a fully terraformed world that just happens to be perfect for Vorthan occupation." Morrison looked grim. "That's not just fraud. That's theft on an interplanetary scale." "We need to document everything," Dr. Rodriguez said, working frantically with her equipment. "Soil samples, atmospheric readings, chemical residue analysis. If we can prove that the contamination was deliberately introduced and is now being deliberately removed, we have them." They worked for the next 3 hours, collecting samples and data from multiple locations around the landing site. The evidence was overwhelming. Every test confirmed that Kepler Prime had been systematically poisoned and was now being systematically cleaned up. "This is incredible," Dr. Rodriguez said as she compiled their findings. Dr. Thane's research was completely accurate. The Vorthans have been using terraforming as a cover for the largest colonial land grab in galactic history. How many worlds are we talking about? Based on these chemical signatures, potentially hundreds. This process could have been going on for decades. Jake felt sick as the implications hit him. How many colonial expeditions failed because they arrived at worlds that were supposed to be habitable but weren't? "Too many," Kira said quietly. "My father estimated that over 2 million colonists have been affected by failed terraforming projects in the past 50 years. 2 million people who never got the chance to build new lives because the Vorthans wanted their planets." Morrison added, "They were so focused on their work that they almost missed the sound of approaching ships. It was Sarah, monitoring communications from the Resilient, who gave them the warning. "We've got company," she called over the comm system. 3 Vorthan troop transports, approaching fast from the north. Morrison immediately began gathering up the scientific equipment. "How long do we have?" 5 minutes, maybe less." "That's not enough time to pack everything properly," Dr. Rodriguez protested. "It'll have to be enough. We can't afford to let the Vorthans catch us here." They worked frantically to secure their samples and data, abandoning some of the less critical equipment in favor of speed. Jake helped Dr. Rodriguez protect the most important samples while Morrison and his team prepared the ship for immediate departure. "Transport 1 is landing," Sarah reported. "About 2 kilometers north of our position. The others are circling, probably looking for our ship. Can we take off without being detected?" "Not a chance. Once we light the engines, they'll know exactly where we are." Morrison made a quick decision. "Dr. Rodriguez, get those samples secure and prepare for emergency departure. Everyone else, defensive positions. We're going to have to fight our way out." As they boarded the Resilient, Jake could see Vorthan soldiers deploying from their transport ships in the distance. They moved with military precision, clearly experienced in this kind of operation. They know we're here, Kira observed. This isn't a random patrol. No, Morrison agreed grimly. Someone told them exactly where to look. Sarah was already starting the ship's engines when the first Vorthan troops appeared at the edge of the meadow. They immediately opened fire, their energy weapons sending bright bolts of plasma toward the Resilient. "Shields up," Sarah called, though Jake knew the small freighter's defensive systems weren't designed for military combat. The Resilient lifted off under fire, its hull shuddering under the impact of Vorthan weapons. Through the viewport, Jake could see more troops emerging from the forest, all of them focused on bringing down the escaping ship. "Jump coordinates laid in," Sarah announced. "Hang on, this is going to be rough." The ship accelerated rapidly, climbing toward the upper atmosphere, while Vorthan fighters moved to intercept. Jake watched the tactical display as Sarah performed a series of evasive maneuvers that pushed both the ship and its occupants to their limits. "Jump in 30 seconds, Sarah called. A massive explosion rocked the ship as a Vorthan plasma torpedo found its mark. Alarms blared throughout the Resilient as systems overloaded and compartments lost atmosphere. "Hull breach in Section 4. Morrison reported. "Sealing emergency bulkheads. 10 seconds to jump." Jake grabbed onto the near support beam as the ship shook violently. Through the chaos, he could see Kira clutching the precious data they had collected, determination etched on her pale features. The stars stretched into lines as the Resilient entered hyperspace, carrying them away from Kepler Prime and toward the rendezvous with the Meridian. They had the evidence they needed to expose the Vorthan conspiracy. Now, they just had to live long enough to present it.